Welcome to episode 146 of Gods and Heroes of Ancient Greece. My name is MyLinda Butterworth, and today we continue with the tale of Odysseus and the story of Odysseus Reaches Ithaca. The sleep of Odysseus was sweet and peaceful as death. The ship glided across the sea as swiftly and safely as a 4-horse chariot speeds over the plain or a hawk flies through the air. It seemed to know it was carrying a precious burden, a man who in wisdom was the peer of gods, and who had borne more than mortal suffering, though now his slumber had blotted out the memory of battle and shipwreck. When the brightest of the stars shone in the sky, announcing the coming of the day, the ship approached Ithaca, and soon it entered the bay consecrated to Phorcys, the old man of the sea. Here 2 rocky promontories jutted out into the water, one on each side, and formed a safe harbor. Midway between them grew an old olive tree, and beside it was a twilit cave, the dwelling of nymphs. In it were rows of bowls and jars of stone where bees stored their honey. There were also looms of stone strung with purple thread, which the nymphs wove into beautiful garments. 2 springs which never ran dry gushed through the cave. It had 2 entrances, one toward the north wind for mortals to enter, the other a hidden door toward the south wind for the immortal nymphs. Near this cave the Phaeacians landed. They lifted Odysseus with the linen sheet and the mat on which he lay, and laid him down in the sand under the olive tree, still overpowered by sleep. Then they unloaded all the gifts Alcinous and Arete had sent to the ship, and put them a little to one side, so that a passer-by might not see them too readily, and perhaps rob the sleeper. Since they dared not wake him, thinking that his deep slumber was sent by the gods, they took to their oars again and steered for home. But Poseidon, the sea god, was angry at the Phaeacians because, with the help of Pallas, they had gone contrary to his wish that Odysseus suffer many woes. So he asked Zeus for permission to take vengeance on them. The father of gods granted his request. As their ship approached the island of Scheria and sped toward the home coast with billowing sails, Poseidon rose through the waves, struck it with the flat of his hand, and then sank back into the sea. Instantly the ship and everything on it was turned to stone and rooted fast. The Phaeacians, who had sighted the ship and run to the shore to welcome their countrymen, were amazed to see it stop in full course. But Alcinous guessed what had happened. He called an assembly and said, "I fear this is the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy of which my father told me. Poseidon, so he said, hates us because, good sailors that we are, we bring all strangers who ask our help safely back to their native lands. And one day, he went on to tell me, one of our ships returning from such a journey would be turned to stone and would be rooted fast before our city like a rock. From this day forward, we must give up our custom of seeing strangers home. But now, let us sacrifice 12 bullocks to the angry sea god, lest he surround our city with a solid wall of stone." When they heard this, the Phaeacians shuddered with terror and hastened to prepare the victims. Odysseus, meanwhile, had awakened, but he had been away from Ithaca so long that he did not recognize his own country. Besides, Pallas Athene had shed a mist over the land because she did not want him to reach his palace before preparing him for what he would find there. And so everything, the winding paths, the bay, the cliffs, and the tall trees, looked unfamiliar to him. He sat up, struck his forehead with his hand, and lamented, "To what new and strange land have I come? What new monsters shall I find here? If only I had stayed with the Phaeacians, who received me so hospitably. But it seems they have betrayed me, for they promised to take me home to Ithaca, and now they have abandoned me on a foreign coast. May Zeus avenge them. They have most likely stolen the gifts I had aboard." He looked around and saw tripods, cauldrons, gold and clothing in orderly piles. He began to count his goods, but nothing was missing. While he was still hesitating what to do, Athene came up to him in the shape of a youth, a shepherd, but delicately formed as the son of a king. Her mantle fell in folds from her shoulders, and she wore sandals and carried a spear in her hand. Odysseus was glad to see a human being, and courteously inquired where he was, and whether this was the mainland or an island. "You must be from far away," the goddess replied. "If you do not know the name of this country, all the world has heard of it. It is to be such a hilly region, and we cannot raise horses as they do in the land of the Argives. But we are not poor. The earth yields a plentiful harvest of grain and grapes. We have countless herds of cattle and goats, tall forests and pure springs, and those who live here have helped make the land famous. Even in Troy, which is surely a distant city, people have heard of the island of Ithaca." How Odysseus rejoiced to hear the name of his own country. Still, he was careful not to blurt out his name to the unknown shepherd. He pretended to have come from the far-off island of Crete with half his property. The other half, so he said, so he left there for his sons. He had slain a man who tried to rob him, so he spun out his tale, and he had been forced to flee from his native land. When he had finished his story, Pallas Athene smiled and passed her hand caressingly over his face, and suddenly she changed into a tall, beautiful woman. "Really," she said to him, "even among the gods themselves, it would take a cunning knave to outdo you. Even in your very own realm, you will not cease dissembling. But let us say no more about it. I agree that you are the craftiest of men, just as I am the wisest of immortals. Yet you did not recognize me. You did not dream that I was beside you, and saw to it that the Phaeacians met courteously and hospitably. And now I have come to help you hide the gifts they gave you, to warn you that trouble awaits you in your palace, and to discuss with you the best way to meet it." Odysseus looked at the goddess in astonishment and answered, "Noble daughter of Zeus, how could a mortal recognize you who can assume so many different shapes? I have not seen you in your own form since the fall of Troy. But now I beg you to tell me whether it is really true that I am in Ithaca, or whether you deceived me, and to comfort me in my distress." "Use your eyes," Athene replied. "Do you not recognize the bay of Phorcys, that olive tree, the cave of the nymphs, where you offered up many a sacrifice in days gone by, and those dark wooded mountains, the range of Neriton?" So spoke Athene, and she dissolved the mist so that the hero saw his country clearly before him. Joyfully he threw himself on the earth, kissed it, prayed to the nymphs, the patron deities of that place. Then the goddess helped him hide his treasure in the recesses of the cave. When they had rolled a stone in front of it, Odysseus and Athene sat down under the sacred olive tree to devise death for the suitors of whose insolence Athene told him, as well as of the faithfulness of Penelope. "Had you not reported all this to me," said Odysseus, when he had heard what had happened, "I should have been killed on my arrival home, just as surely as Agamemnon was murdered in Mycenae. But if you, gracious goddess, give me your aid, I shall not be afraid to stand alone against 300 foes." "Be of good courage, my friend," the goddess replied. "I shall never desert you. Above all, I shall see to it now that no one on this island recognizes you. The flesh shall shrivel on your stately limbs, the brown hair vanish from your head. I shall clothe you in rags which everyone will regard with loathing. Your shining eyes will lose their luster. Not only the suitors, but even your wife and son will take you for an ugly old stranger. And now I want you to seek out your most honest and loyal subject, the man who tends your swine and is devoted to you from the bottom of his heart. You will find him near the spring of Arethusa, where he is pasturing the herd. Sit down beside him and ask him about everything that is going on. In the meantime, I shall hasten to Sparta and recall your son Telemachus, who went there to inquire about you at Menelaus." "Since you know all about me," said Odysseus with some annoyance, "why did you not tell me in the first place? Did you want him to wander over the sea like myself, while strangers waste his substance?" But the goddess comforted him, saying, "Do not fear for your son. I myself guided him, and my purpose in urging his journey was to mature the youth through travel, and let him win glory, so that on his return he might face the suitors as a man. Rest assured that he is not suffering the slightest discomfort. He is lodged in the palace of Menelaus, and has all his heart could wish. It is true that the suitors are lying in ambush for him, and want to kill him before he reaches home, but I do not think this will come to pass. Long before that, many of them will sprawl dead on the ground." So said the goddess, and lightly touched the hero with her staff. Instantly his flesh shriveled, his back grew bent, and he looked like a ragged and dirty beggar. She handed him a staff and a patched sack, which he slung over his shoulder by its frayed cord. Then she disappeared. And here is where I end my tale for today. But I'll be back with more tales. Many more tales. Until then, my friends, enjoy the journey.